So in amongst the reaction from Clacton, let's not forget why this by-election was called. It followed a detailed investigation by the Sunday Times into Nigel Farage's finances and his links to a convicted fraudster. Now, we believe Nigel Farage is likely to be interviewed by the Parliamentary Standards Watchdog within weeks of his return to Parliament. And we've heard this morning from the party's deputy leader, Richard Tice, speaking to Ian Collins on Talk Radio about how Reform was celebrating.
An outstanding result for Nigel Farage, given that all by-elections have much lower turnouts than a general election. To secure some 1,000 more votes than he got 2 years ago shows that the good constituents of Clacton have basically humiliated the establishment and the mainstream media. And you know what they've said? They've said, we want more Nigel, not less Nigel. And that's a remarkable thing.
Well, Richard Tice also took aim at the other main parties for not putting up candidates.
The other main parties, Labour, the Tories, the Lib Dems, they didn't turn up. They bottled it like a bunch of cowardly chickens. And in so doing, they were greatly rude and discourteous to the Clacton constituents. And sure, not everyone's going to like a particular candidate, in this case, Nigel, and they were left with having to vote for a bin. And I think that the establishment needs to, frankly, take a long, hard look at itself.
Well, joining us now is Ben Taylor, editor of the Sunday Times, who I think, Ben, Richard Tice would class you as being part of the establishment and Times Radio along with the Sunday Times. I wonder how you're feeling as a result of that election. Nigel Farage gets 63% of the vote, 1,000 more votes than last time. Has this big political gamble from Nigel Farage actually paid off, Ben?
Well, it's paid off up to a point. I mean, he's gone back to his constituents. He said, "Are you good people of Clacton worried about the stories of the £5 million donation that he still won't quite explain, or the the deep friendship he has with George Cottrell?" And they've said, "No, we're not that bothered at all. We think you're a good MP, and we're going to vote you back into Westminster." So on that level, it's worked well for him. But that was never really the point of what we did. I mean, the idea that the Sunday Times just investigated him to throw him out of Westminster is just silly. I mean, and Mr. Tice deep down knows this. You know, he knows that branding established newspapers as the establishment plays well to his base. Ever since the initial story broke, I think it was the weekend of July the 5th, Reform don't particularly want to engage with the detail. They just want to shoot the messenger. And I have to say, some of the language used by, Reform supporters, quite influential people on social media, that's been extremely personal, aimed at members of staff here, has been distasteful. And they know exactly what they're doing. But, I think Farage should celebrate. He's got back in. He obviously has fresh, renewed questions to answer when the autumn comes back. I'm sure he's ready for it. But I don't think it really proves very much. What I think he'll be pleased about is the turnout. I think the turnout was impressive. It's August. Most people are on holiday. Well, some of them are in Clacton, but a lot of the constituents will be away, and he can point to that. But to go back to the original investigation, I mean, the original investigation still stands. They've not really addressed it. In fact, Farage has sought to double down. He's not cutting links with so-called posh George Cottrell, the fraudster. There's a police inquiry, we know, into the donation made by Cottrell's mother, which police are investigating along with the Electoral Commission where it actually came from, and the Parliamentary Standards inquiry into why didn't he declare these donations when he was preparing himself for a comeback continues. I mean, we're sort of back where we started, I would say. Yeah,
and we could end up with another by-election if the Parliamentary Standards Commissions find that there has been wrongdoing about this £5 million donation from Christopher Harborne. It's up to sort of ultimately the residents of Clacton whether there's another by-election. But, what's the net result of this, Ben?
Well, we don't know yet, do we? I mean, I think the point of the investigations, not just by the Sunday Times and other parts of the media, hasn't really. Reform take it very, very personally. I take a view that Reform have had quite an easy ride for the last 2 or 3 years in terms of forensic scrutiny of what makes up the party. I think they, and this year has been different for them, and they've not enjoyed it. It's a very tight group of people who run the party, a tightly knit group of people who run the party at the top, and I think that they've not enjoyed a light being shone on them, as the Sunday Times did. I always remind people it was Sir Keir Starmer and Wahid Ali 2 years ago. I didn't hear Mr. Tice complaining about that, and I think that the long-term issue here isn't. Is there another by-election? Is Nigel Farage going to be thrown out in the Commons? It's fundamentally, can he answer the question? Can he answer questions from which every other MP has to answer? In other words, do the rules apply to him or don't they? And I think that's the only motivation for this. Do the rules apply to a sitting MP, even though he doesn't quite like them?
Has he almost sort of played checkmate, though, to the Parliamentary Standards investigation, where he can now say, well, the residents of Clacton knew about this donation, they've read the Sunday Times over the last few weeks, and they didn't care?
Well, he can say what he wants. I mean, and he will. But I'm afraid, it doesn't work like that.
Because even if the rules apply to him, maybe they don't hurt him if he breaks them.
It depends what. Look, you could very much have a situation where a sanction is imposed on Nigel Farage. It could be a suspension or something like that. I don't quite know how it could all play out, or I don't pretend to know because I can't see into the future. And he'll shrug it off. I mean, but the point, that was never the point. The point of the investigation was to say, this is what's happened. You make your own minds up. I actually have no view. The point of the investigation was to say, this happened. This is the person he's dealing with. He didn't want it to be made public. We've made it public. You, the readers, work it out for yourselves.
And the public.
And the wider public are what's interesting here, because Nigel Farage says he wants to be the next Prime Minister. He said he will be the next Prime Minister. To do that, he's got to win over quite a few people. He can fire up his base, which he's done very effectively. He can win county councils, control of, which he's done. He's won a mayoralty in Greater Lincolnshire. He's been an extraordinary electoral force, I would argue, for the last 2 or 3 years. Where he's weak, actually, is at Westminster, because he doesn't have many MPs. So he starts from a very low base of 4 or 5 MPs, and he has to get up to, as we all know, to form an overall majority, 320 odd. That's a huge task. To do that, he needs to win over a lot of people who may be, interested in reform, but also slightly nervous about them. And I do think the questions about financial transparency don't play well with a large part of the electorate.
Because Clacton is a very unique set of circumstances, isn't it? It's sort of reform heartland. It's where UKIP had their first MP elected. And what we have seen, Ben, at the same time as lots of your investigations have come out in the Sunday Times, is reform's popularity in the polls has started to dip. Yeah,
but I also think that's overstated. I think that I don't think it's dipped that much. I think what it's dipped in a way that's significant. To get to where you need to get to be a majority partner in a coalition, or to form an outright government, you do need to get into that 30-35%. Probably, Labour got to 33.9% last time. They were helped massively by tactical voting. I can't see Reform being the beneficiary of tactical voting. In fact, they could actually...
The opposite.
They could lose from tactical voting. So if they don't get to that 35%, then they're not in charge of their own destiny. And to get to that point, you need to win over people who bluntly are either nervous about you or don't like you at the moment. And that's their problem. It's not just one Sunday Times story. There is a general sense that, is this a serious party? Zia Youssef, who's their Home Affairs spokesman, he's not an MP. They've got some old Tories that got thrown out last time, and then they've got Nigel, and they've got a couple of others. So when people are sitting down thinking about, in 2-3 years' time, where do I put my cross, they will look at Reform, I think, in a serious way, and that's a great achievement. They will look at them as a potential party to run the country, and they'll make their minds up. But to get over that line, you know, is quite a thing. Ask the Labour Party. I mean, they've spent decades losing elections, you know, with all the history and the heritage that they've had, and people have looked at previous leaders. They've looked at Ed Miliband, they looked at Neil Kinnock, and they decided, no, we don't want these people. And I think that Farage knows that, and I think that's why the questions over probity at the very top have hurt, because they chip away at that, you know, competence for government.
Ben, thank you very much. Ben Taylor, editor of the Sunday Times, for more context really on how we got here in the first place for that by-election to be called in Clacton. Thank you, Ben.